Today, we are going to talk about federal immigration agencies. Alvin Bragg, co-director of New York Law School's Racial Justice Program. Welcome, and let's get to it.
This administration has basically dismantled our entire asylum system, and yesterday announced that they were dropping the number of refugees that the United States will let in.
You hear what the president has said, the countries he described. I mean, it is so directly targeted at people that don't look like the president. So I think that's probably clear to everyone here and clear your viewership, but I just feel like we have to say it out loud. It is so obvious.
Right. We have a white nationalist in the White House right now, right? And who, on whole, thinks that immigrants are bad for the country, especially immigrants of color. Who don't look like him, who don't, share his worldview, in order to keep America for white people in leadership. And so no matter how the federal government is set up, no matter, if that is who's in the White House, those are the goals that are going to be pursued.
The related problem is the president. And so you have two, I would just separate them out, right? ICE is lawless, but so long as you have these agency heads who all report and to a man who has the views you're talking about. We see Charlottesville. We could talk about, we can make the list is so long we can't go into it all. But just by one way of example, I mean, the Department of Justice, when we're talking about sort of the, immigration proceedings, I mean, those, the reporting structure there is going up to the Attorney General and Barr.
Ever since he rode down the golden escalator, Democrats have wanted nothing more than to get Mr. Trump. We had the grabber by the you-know-what tape, Russian collusion, the Steele dossier, impeachment 1, impeachment 2, a dozen other smaller scandals in between. Nothing worked.
But one of the things leading into this vote for the Manhattan District Attorney's Office, I know a lot of people are wondering, whoever has this job, are they going to convict Donald Trump?
Look, that is the number one issue. I'm the candidate in the race who has the experience with Donald Trump. I was the chief deputy in the Attorney General's office. We sued the Trump administration over 100 times for the Muslim travel ban, for family separation at the border, for shenanigans with the census. So I know how to litigate with him. I also led the team that did the Trump Foundation case. So I'm ready to go wherever the facts take me and to inherit that case. And I think, it'd be hard to argue with the fact that that'd be the most important, most high profile case. And I've seen him up front and seen the lawlessness that he can do.
And you believe it should happen?
I believe we have to hold him accountable. I haven't seen all the facts beyond the public, but I've litigated with him. And so I'm prepared to go where the facts take me once I see them and hold him accountable.
And Manhattan's new district attorney makes history. Alvin Bragg was sworn in during a private ceremony at City Hall. He's the first African-American Manhattan DA.
I think the hallmarks of that are honesty and transparency. I view it as kind of a family conversation, right? I'm going to tell you the truth all the time. I expect the same from you.
The Manhattan District Attorney's Office's investigation of Donald Trump's finances effectively ended today, after the two lead prosecutors who'd been gathering evidence against the former president for more than 3 years submitted their resignations.
They believe that the new Manhattan District Attorney Alvin Bragg is not taking the investigation seriously and that he may not even want the investigation to continue.
I believe we have to hold him accountable.
It is clear new Manhattan DA Alvin Bragg, who took over the position last month, did not feel he had enough evidence to prosecute the former president.
Headline: Why is the Manhattan District Attorney returning evidence in the Trump case? Prosecutors have begun sending back documents to people who turned over information about former President Donald Trump's business in perhaps the starkest sign yet that the Manhattan District Attorney's investigation into Trump may be winding down.
They think that Bragg doesn't really think there's much of a case there.
I believe we have to hold him accountable.
Because we know that New York Governor Hochul is reportedly considering what remedies she may have available to deal with Bragg. And people who are running to be governor of New York, both Republicans and Democrats, have pledged that if elected, they will remove Alvin Bragg from his position.
His pathetically weak case against former President Trump has totally imploded. Let's be very clear here. The case died this very week. It is very obvious. It is very clear. It's transparent. Alvin Bragg had every intention of indicting Donald J. Trump this week, but for the second straight day, grand jury proceedings were canceled today. Now, Bragg is now telling Reuters that it was former President Donald Trump that created a false expectation of arrest. It was never actually going to happen, according to Bragg, it seems.
So, Alvin Bragg, you want to be a stand-up guy? How about less talking and more indicting?
Former President Donald Trump has been indicted by a grand jury in New York. Trump was under investigation by the DA's office for his alleged hush money payment to adult film star Stormy Daniels during the 2016 campaign.
I believe we have to hold him accountable.
I think no matter how you feel about the former president, whether you support former President Trump or you do not like former President Trump, this is a remarkable moment in history to see a former sitting president, the optics of walking down that 15th floor hallway, flanked by both Secret Service, NYPD, and the New York court officers into a courtroom for criminal charges.
Yeah. So Alvin Bragg, I'll give him credit, it was creative. He takes $130,000 and chops it up into 34 felony counts.
34 felony counts. That's what we've seen. He doesn't really have 34 crimes. He has one alleged action that he's piecemealed out into 34 felony counts because on this date, an entry was made in the books, and on this date, an entry was made in the books. And he's trying to make Trump look like a multiple-time felon, when really he's got one course of conduct that he claims is illegal.
I believe we have to hold him accountable.
And then he concocts this legal theory.
This is what's called a novel legal theory. Be aware when prosecutors are using novel legal theories, it means their case is already starting to be in trouble.
And then he concocts this legal theory that has never been seen in the history of American jurisprudence. Am I using jurisprudence correctly?
Very well,
Thank
Jesse.
you. And no one can understand it.
Now, normally, falsification of business records in New York is a misdemeanor. That would have posed a problem for Alvin Bragg and his promises to get Trump because the statute of limitations on these misdemeanors, 2 years, had long since expired.
Bragg says Trump didn't mark the right ledger. Now, if that was a crime, the statute of limitations expired a long time ago.
Bragg gets around that problem by elevating these alleged petty crimes to felonies, which have a 5-year statute of limitations. How does he do that? He says the alleged record shenanigans were done with the intent to cover up an underlying crime. Remember that, with the intent to cover up an underlying crime.
Bragg's bringing it back to life, splicing it with another crime, but he won't tell us what the other crime is. Is it a New York tax crime? Bragg says Trump actually paid more taxes than he owed. He should get a refund, not handcuffs. Is it a New York state election law violation? Well, Trump didn't run in a New York state election. Is it a federal election law violation? Well, then it's out of Bragg's jurisdiction. He's a state prosecutor. And if Trump defrauded voters in the 2016 election, why are all the charges from 2017? Trump wasn't campaigning in 2017. He was already president. So Fat Alvin can't even read a calendar.
Hey, hey, hey! Strong is the potential for a jury to find reasonable doubt over Donald Trump's involvement in what appears to be Alvin Bragg's lawfare scheme and Michael Cohen's conduct.
Well, the case is worthless. It's really a kangaroo court operation. This is Alvin Bragg is contrived and cobbled together bits and pieces of garbage and tries to, use alchemy to turn it into something that it isn't.
We don't know what the crime is that they are complaining about, and we should. I mean, because an indictment is supposed to illustrate what it is that the defendant did.
Okay. And so I don't see the link being difficult to make.
The indictment is insufficient on its face. It is insufficient in terms of the statute of limitations. If you look at the first several counts, they are in February of 2017, which is beyond 5 years. I think it's the first 15 or 20 counts are outside the 5-year statute of limitations.
But isn't the statute of limitations on the misdemeanor already expired?
It has not already expired, as far as I know, on all 34 counts, right? Because it's a 2-year statute of limitations. For felonies, I think it moves up probably to about 4 or 5 years.
And if it's a federal crime, Bragg doesn't have jurisdiction to prosecute that. And it's clear to me that the New York election law only relates to campaigns for public office in the state of New York. He cannot try to bootstrap a New York state election law violation to raise this to a felony. State election laws do not apply to a presidential race.
Whether Bragg has to prove he can use a federal election law to elevate the misdemeanor charge to a felony, which has never been resolved by any appellate court in New York. Is that true?
It's also based on New York election campaign fraud as well.
State election laws do not apply to a presidential race.
It's also based on New York election campaign fraud as well.
In addition to that, it's selective prosecution.
Be the first in history. And what does this say to the rest of the world? What a way to make history.
Yeah, it's banana republic stuff if it's not a very strong case that is compelling and deserves to be brought.
It is duplicitous. There are 4 counts for 1 act. And you've got an intent that's in question. Did he intend to do it, that being Donald Trump?
You know, this is this guy's job. So let's let him do his job.
But the prosecutor's a Democrat. The jury's full of Democrats. The judge is a Democrat. The judge donated to Biden for president and Stop Republicans. We'll see if he follows the rule of law or is biased.
Listen, you don't bring stuff you don't think you can prove. So
Well, a new report from the House Judiciary Committee takes us behind the Manhattan DA's efforts to take down Donald Trump, with the Judiciary Committee reporting that Manhattan DA Alvin Bragg allowed political motivations and hostility toward Trump to dictate his plans to charge the former president with allegations of falsifying business records. The report states that former federal prosecutor Mark Pomerantz, who was at one time volunteered to serve as special assistant district attorney to develop a case against Trump, he was one of the main forces in pressuring Bragg to charge Trump. Pomerantz, who donated to Hillary Clinton's 2016 campaign, resigned shortly after Bragg took office. But according to the report, quote, when Bragg did not move quickly enough to file charges against President Trump, Pomerantz opted to go public, writing a book and orchestrating a pressure campaign to force Bragg into action, and it worked.
A biased judge, frankly, who should be investigated himself, who's targeting the former president for political purposes. It is clearly obvious. No citizen would be treated to the same attack as what is happening right now to former President Trump.
Oh, he thinks he can do it.
That's selective prosecution.
Alvin Bragg felt he had something, and he's doing his job. That's what we pay him to do.
Let me just say one thing about Alvin Bragg, who made a fool of himself yesterday, as far as I'm concerned. He said, we cannot and will not normalize serious criminal conduct. Are you kidding?
His job is to go after it, and I'm glad he's doing his job.
People are being stabbed, beaten, stabbed, brutalized, and murdered in New York City by career criminals who are being let out again and again. Felonies reduced to misdemeanors unless you're a Republican.
And that will shut a lot of people up who say, well, you know, he's not concerned about what's going on in New York. No, he is. He sees.
This is a pathetic man who is not connected to reality.
Alvin Bragg felt he had something, and he's doing his job.
This is a pathetic man.
So for the last 6 years, they've been trying to create a crime that he's guilty of.
Oh, look, Alvin is a lifelong prosecutor who has over and over again brought cases rooted in the very same themes and issues that are on display here.
And then he concocts this legal theory that has never been seen in the history of American jurisprudence. Am I using jurisprudence correctly?
Very well.
Thank you.
So while this might be a case against a former president, and certainly a high-profile one at that, it's very much aligned with the sorts of cases he's brought throughout his career.
My big disappointment is with the jury. You know, juries are supposed to be a check and balance on the excesses of prosecutors and judges. this jury failed its role of checking and balance these excesses. Of course they did, because they were handpicked by the judge and by the prosecutor to be anti-Trump. These were get Trump jurors. These were jurors who voted between 85 and 90% not to allow Trump to be president, and they will do anything to prevent him from being president. And so their vote was a second vote on November against him being president. It wasn't a vote on the facts of the law of the case. The facts of the law of the case here are an absolute joke. There isn't a serious lawyer in the country, Democrat or Republican, who will privately tell you this was a legitimate case. I'm getting calls from friends of mine who are Democrats and who are liberals, but who won't speak out, who say, of course this is outrageous, of course this is a political trial, of course there was no basis for convicting him of a misdemeanor based on the statute of limitations, but we're thrilled, we're happy, we're cheering for the result.
It doesn't only go one way. Obviously, Republicans are going to take the message that they should prosecute any Democrats who are, even borderline tied to any crime. So this is going to get into a tit for tat. I don't necessarily think that that's wrong either. I think that that's the way to end this kind of behavior, to show that both sides are capable of it. For a long time, only the Democrats have been.